Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of Chai Talk for the Left Hook Substack with Wajatli, where I invite a subject matter expert who's usually far smarter than me to break down one or more than one big questions in 30 minutes or less. And today we have a repeat guest. Yes, Ari Berman, two-time Chai Talk guest. I'm going to get people jackets when they hit Five Timers Club, but Ari Berman is on the beat. He is a Mother Jones correspondent. Specifically, he is the national voting rights correspondent and the author of Ari
Minority Rule, the right-wing attack on the will of the people and the fight to resist it.
Buy it, purchase it. And specifically why I have Ari on is he has a fantastic article that came out just a few days ago that I think needs more eyeballs. It's in Mother Jones. Elon Musk is trying to buy the Wisconsin Supreme Court. Quote, his attack on democracy isn't limited to gutting the federal government. He wants it all. And so the question I have for you is, how is Elon Musk, and rather Elon Musk and the Broligarchy, about to purchase the Wisconsin Supreme Court, and why? It's a big question, but you get into it in your article, and I'll let you have the first salvo.
Well, they're spending millions of dollars on a Wisconsin Supreme Court election this April that's going to decide the balance of power on the court. And they're doing it in a few different ways. A group funded by Musk has spent $1.6 million on TV ads in the race, attacking the progressive candidate. That's a lot of money in a state Supreme Court election.
Building America's Future, that's his dark money group that you mentioned.
Yes, and then there's another group that got involved after my article published that's even more directly tied to Musk, his America PAC, which is spending $1 million or more on voter turnout efforts. So that's directly involved in the race. So he or groups linked to him have already committed almost $3 million in this Wisconsin Supreme Court election. It could become a lot more. I mean, Elon Musk is the kind of guy, if he decides he wants to drop 5, 10, 15, $50 million, who knows, he could in this election. So it's a sign that he's paying attention not just to all the things he's doing to shred the Constitution and dismantle the federal government, but he's paying attention to local races that often go overlooked, where his money and his platform could have a even bigger influence than in, for example, the presidential race.
And before we drill down to the specifics, in your article does a fantastic job. Elon Musk has already spent $290 million to help Trump get elected. Steve Bannon, before he turned on Elon Musk for apparently being too immigrant, he said he thanked Elon Musk. He said without Elon Musk, Trump wouldn't become president. And so now he's pouring money in Wisconsin. And now people say, okay, Wisconsin is a swing state. But why Wisconsin and why this Supreme Court race? What's the long-term plan here?
Well, it's such an important state Supreme Court in general because Wisconsin's a narrowly divided swing state. So things that happen in Wisconsin have national ramifications. Remember, the Wisconsin Supreme Court in 2020 came one vote short from overturning the 2020 election and ruling that Donald Trump could in fact invalidate 200,000 more or plus votes. So it matters for that reason. It matters for redistricting, for who draws the lines for the U.S. House, for whether or not state legislative maps will be rigged or competitive. It matters for things like abortion. There is an 1849 abortion ban in Wisconsin that the state Supreme Court is set to rule on. The balance of power in that case is likely going to decide what ends up happening, whether abortion is criminalized in Wisconsin or legal. So there's a lot of hot button issues that are going on here. There's also, I would say, a financial interest here because Elon Musk got involved in this race 8 days after a state court ruled that Tesla couldn't own dealerships in the state because Wisconsin has a law preventing manufacturers from owning dealerships. And this was something that I didn't initially realize when I published my article. I thought, Musk is focused on this long-term takeover of a key swing state in a way that will help him and his allies and Trump, but also there's a direct financial interest. He wants to control the court so he can open a bunch of Tesla dealerships as well. So I think, like with everything MAGA, there's a mix of sort of some kind of power grab mixed in with, of course, just like blatant self-interest as well.
Yeah, it's all politics are personal, and what we've seen with Musk so far is when he, let's be honest, was the one who pushed out the FAA chief. It was because the FAA fined Musk's company for safety violations. So he had to go. So he's going after all regulations. He's punishing anyone who's standing in his way. And of course, hey, if authoritarianism helps you with your bottom line, why not? You talked about it right now, but if you can expand on it a bit, because I think people need to really focus in on Wisconsin. Texas and Florida seem to be the cultural laboratories for MAGA's culture war, right? They see as extreme as they can get in Texas and Florida, and it comes here right here next to me in Virginia and Maryland. When it came to woke and CRT, they're like, "Oh, this works. This tracks. We did it at a local level. Now let's expand it nationally." So, talk to us about how Wisconsin, I would say, for the past 10 years, has been a laboratory, which probably is far even more sinister than the culture war.
It is because it's really been the laboratory for dismantling democracy, and it really shows how you can turn what should be a 50-50 swing state into a state that is much more extreme and much more far right than the voting population of the state. So what happened is after 2010, Scott Walker became the Republican governor, and Republicans had these big majorities in the legislature. And they did all these things to entrench their power. They passed some of the most gerrymandered maps in the country. So even when it was a 50-50 state in presidential elections, Republicans had these huge lopsided majorities, in some cases super majorities, in the state legislature. They stripped unions of collective bargaining rights to try to demoralize and defang the number one ally of the Democratic Party. They passed all of these laws to make it harder to vote, including a voter ID law that prevented tens of thousands of people from being able to cast ballots in 2016. When Scott Walker was ousted and when there was a Democratic governor elected, the legislature turned around and stripped power from him in a lame duck session that was pretty much a soft coup that in many ways was a precursor to what happened, a nonviolent version of what happened on January 6th. So there's all these actions in Wisconsin that have then contributed to the radicalization of the Republican Party nationwide. And so I think people are really paying attention to the state courts there because the state courts rule on all of these things. The state courts going to rule on redistricting, on abortion, on labor rights, on even election outcomes themselves. And so whether it has a progressive or a liberal majority is really important, particularly at this moment in time when so much power is being devolved to the states by the US Supreme Court, and where the states are really the only check on Donald Trump right now. I mean, Democrats can protest in Washington, but they don't actually have any power. Right. Whereas Democrats have power in the states. There are, Democratic governors and attorneys general in places like Wisconsin. But the state courts are ultimately going to rule on the legality of so much that's happening right now. And so it's tremendously important. And this state Supreme Court was under conservative control for 15 years and upheld a lot of this stuff, upheld the gerrymandering and the voter suppression, the lame duck laws. It was only in 2023 that it had a progressive majority. Now they're trying to keep that progressive majority to really be able to undo a lot of the bad things that have been done in Wisconsin. That progressive majority has to last more than a year or two.
Yeah, and before we talk about it right now, I think it's important for people to understand the stakes and how elections matter and how just one judge can flip it. Can you just briefly talk to us about that 2023 election, which got the, if you will, progressive judge that finally tilted it barely with one vote in the favor of people who are against, authoritarianism?
Yeah, Janet Protasiewicz was the progressive candidate who won. These are ostensibly nonpartisan races, but the judges are always backed by one party or another. So she was backed by Democrats. She won, I think, emphasizing abortion rights and also just the general undermining of democracy in the states. Her election had an immediate ramification, which is that the court then struck down the gerrymandered maps that gave Republicans these lopsided majorities. It put in place fair maps. The Democratic governor and the state legislature actually agreed on new maps, which never would have happened without a change in balance of the court. As a result of that, Democrats picked up 14 seats in the last election. Republicans still have a majority, but it's much closer to a 50-50 body than it was before. Democrats now have a chance to pick up both chambers of the legislature. And to me, this wasn't a victory for Democrats, big D. It was a victory for democracy, small d, because there's actually competitive elections in the legislature. And there's actually a way that you can try to hold the legislature accountable that you couldn't before. And so that's just one example of how it matters. I think there's a feeling that if progressives end up retaining control of the court, they could strike down Wisconsin's 1849 abortion ban. Yep. They could strike down the congressional maps in Wisconsin, where Republicans have a 6-2 majority that could then lead to Democrats picking up more seats. They could strike down more voter suppression laws. They could strike down the ban on collective bargaining rights for labor, start rebuilding labor unions in the states. So there's a lot that the progressive majority could do here. And this relates directly to a lot of the things that are being shredded right now by Donald Trump and Elon Musk in Washington.
And before we get into that, I want to unpack some of that stuff. Some of these big key issues that they're gonna basically exploit and take the DeLorean back to the 19th century, like you said, especially in abortion rights. But before we do that, they have to pick a horse, if you will, who will do their job. And your article spends time on Musk's preferred candidate, Brad Schimmel. I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly.
Yeah.
Talk to us about the man for the job, Judge Schimmel.
So Judge Schimmel, he's a judge in suburban Milwaukee. He's best known as Scott Walker's attorney general from 2015 to 2019, where he did a lot of controversial things. But the thing that's, I think, unique about him is he's run a uniquely MAGA candidacy for a state Supreme Court race. Usually, people in state Supreme Court races try not to be too partisan. He's been the opposite. He went to Trump's inauguration. He praised Elon Musk for getting involved in the race. He said he'd welcome Trump's endorsement. He said that the January 6th insurrectionists didn't get a fair trial. And he's openly called on dark money groups to get involved in the race, which is also, again, these are judges we're talking about. This is not running for the U.S. House or running for the U.S. Senate or running for president. I mean, these are people that are supposed to uphold the law in Wisconsin. He's basically saying, we want the Elon Musks of the world to spend money on our behalf. Not to mention the fact that if he wins the race in the court, is going to hear cases involving these interests, not just Elon Musk, but the state's top business group. There's another guy in Wisconsin, Richard Uihlein. Uihlein is the company that makes all those cardboard boxes and stuff. I guarantee you, if you have a lot of things like that, it's going to say Uihlein on them. And he is one of the biggest funders of election denial. And he is also putting millions of dollars behind this race. So I think their takeaway from the election they lost in April 2023 was that we didn't do enough to nationalize the race. We didn't make the race MAGA enough. We didn't get Trump involved enough, and we didn't raise enough money from the Elon Musks of the world. So we need to do that. We basically need to run a Trump-like campaign for state Supreme Court, and no one's ever really done that before to this extent. So we don't know whether it will work or not. I think it's a risky strategy. First, because Trump is becoming more unpopular, but I think Musk is very unpopular. So the extent to which, yes, he's benefiting from Musk's money, but if he's defined as Elon Musk's judge, I'm not sure that's really a great position to be in Wisconsin or any other state right now.
And we're recording this just on the heels of the announcement that I think this is the first time the Trump administration went against Elon Musk. Specifically, they're telling federal employees to basically ignore Elon Musk's request of the 5 things that you have done today. If you've been keeping track like I have, that's the first time. Trump has gone all in with Elon Musk for everything, or almost shut down the government, pro H-1B visas. He's a patriot, let Doge do whatever it wants. But this was a bridge too far. And like you said, last week, those 4 polls came out. Elon Musk has a 2-to-1 unfavorability to favorability rating. I think it's his favorability is going to keep plummeting. And I also think Trump's favorability, which according to those 4 polls also went down, is going to keep plummeting. So it is a very risky strategy, but nonetheless, I don't underestimate the power of money and disinformation, Ari. Who is Schimmel running against? What do you think about their chances?
He's running against Susan Crawford, who is a judge in Dane County, home to Madison. She is kind of a prototypical progressive judge. She is a liberal, but I don't think a far left liberal. And she's kind of in the mold of the women who have run and won successfully. 3 progressive women have been elected to the state Supreme Court, backed by Democrats in recent years. And I think she's in that mold. So right now, they are basically running the culture war playbook against her. They are basically saying, she's soft on crime. The group that the Musk group ran an ad basically saying that she gave a lenient sentence to someone who molested a 7-year-old girl at a pool, things like that. I mean, judges issue so many rulings, but it's always easy to try to take one of those rulings and bring it out of context. But they're basically saying there was another ad that one of the state's largest business groups ran that called her "Catch and Release Crawford."
Same
so
crap.
I mean, they're just it's the same
usual
stuff that's been done forever. It hasn't really worked in the past, but I do think the Musk factor is unique, not just in the money, but the platform. Right? I mean, so many people who otherwise wouldn't know about the Wisconsin Supreme Court race could learn about it in a very misleading way if he starts tweeting about it, which he already did. He said, vote Republican because of voter fraud in Wisconsin. Well, there is no voter fraud in Wisconsin, but he was referring to a decision that reinstated mail ballot drop boxes in the state. And there's no evidence that drop boxes lead to voter fraud, but nonetheless, he's spreading that to millions of people. So that's another dynamic here. Now, whether that's targeted or not, we don't know. A lot of people outside of Wisconsin who are going to have no bearing on that race could see that stuff. But also, if Musk gets involved, that sends a signal to other people, other big donors, to get involved here. So I think what Republicans are going to have is they're going to have a lot of money in this race in a way that they may not have had in the last election. They're going to be able to nationalize this race in a way that they weren't able to do the last time. And this is really the first major test of the post-Trump, and when I say post-Trump, I mean post-2024 political era, because there's been some special elections so far, but they've been very under the radar. This is the first time we're actually going to see, are people souring on Trump? Are people souring on Musk? Are some of the issues that may not have worked as well in 2024, like abortion, do they remain very salient in state politics? And so I think it's going to tell us a lot about the political moment we're in. Not everything, of course, but I think it will be instructive on how these key swing states are reacting to the Trump presidency.
And there's a couple issues that I'm really curious about, whether or not Democrats can be smart and message effectively, which I think they can based on what we said, is abortion. Talk to us about how shamelessly retrograde and regressive they are on abortion and what they seek to do. You mentioned it briefly, but let's get back to it. This
is crazy.
They're not trying to go back to 20th century. Literally, they're going back to 19th century.
Yeah, I mean, Wisconsin has an abortion ban from 1849 that criminalizes abortion as manslaughter, with the exception of the life of the mother. I mean, so I think it's probably the most extreme abortion law in the country if you look at what it does and how old it is. And I mean, you'd think nobody would defend something that's this old. I mean, women didn't have the right to vote at the time. So, I mean, they had absolutely no say in this law. It was passed by an all-male legislature decades before women won the right to vote. Many, many, many decades before women of color won the right to vote. So, I mean, it's such a retrograde law. It's been controversial for so long. 80% of Wisconsinites or more disapprove of it. The legislature refuses to change it because they're worried, first and foremost, about primary challengers. But Schimmel supports it. The conservative candidate supports it. He said there's nothing wrong with the law. And the Wisconsin Supreme Court is going to decide the legality of this. And this is going to be really important because there are other states that have these retrograde abortion bans. And so if it's struck down in Wisconsin, that is something that I think is going to have impact in other states. And if it's upheld, I mean, that's going to be yet another major rollback for abortion rights. It's also worth noting that when he was state attorney general, Schimmel appointed a solicitor general who argued before Dobbs in favor of overturning Roe v. Wade and really laid out the strategy, the legal strategy of how you would do it. And so Schimmel is not just supporting this 1849 abortion ban, he's been very active on these issues. And I expect this to be a very, very big issue in the race because, listen, the state Supreme Court, this is what they do. They rule on things like abortion. They don't really have an impact on the price of eggs, right? But they have a big impact on key rights and freedoms. And so I think there are some Democrats who are thinking, okay, well, the abortion issue didn't resonate to the extent that it did and that we wanted to in 2024. Therefore, we shouldn't really talk about it anymore. And I think that would be a major mistake in general, but I also think specifically in the context of these state elections, because state Supreme Courts, statewide races in general, have a lot more to do with things like abortion than even the presidency might, when you think about who's going to directly be ruling on these issues.
And since then, we have examples of women who want to be mothers dying in Georgia and Texas because they couldn't get medical treatment. Also, OBGYNs are leaving Florida and red states, and this issue is going to amplify. And another issue, which is going to be interesting, is you mentioned, I mean, it's with MAGA, it's all projection, right? Every allegation is a confession. It's so hypocritical that they're saying we care about election integrity. And you said in your piece that Musk and Schimmel are saying election integrity, but at the same time, they're perfectly fine with the big lie. And this is on the heels of, according to the poll that we mentioned, a majority of Americans, even Republicans, are against Trump pardoning all 1,600 insurrectionists, including the violent ones. So when it comes to election integrity, which is the big issue they're talking about, do you think that Democrats have a chance here to finally punch back?
Yeah, I do, because also Brad Schimmel supported the January 6th insurrectionists, said they didn't get a fair trial, and praised Trump for pardoning them, saying Trump has the power to do this. So, I
Wow.
mean, that's an issue that got injected in this race in a way that it might not otherwise at a state level. So I do think that it's important here. The election and quote unquote integrity thing is a big one in Wisconsin, though, because Republicans in Wisconsin, while they haven't found any evidence of voter fraud, they have passed a series of laws that made it harder to vote. The Wisconsin Supreme Court has begun rolling back those laws. They reinstituted mail ballot drop boxes. They ruled against getting rid of a mobile voting van. They could potentially strike down voter ID and other measures. They're also, as I said, the redistricting cases are really big, because while they took up state legislative maps for the election, they have not yet ruled on congressional maps. Given how close the U.S. House is right now, if they were to strike down the redistricting maps for the U.S. House and give Democrats a better shot at even picking up 1 to 2 more seats, that would have an impact on elections in 2026 or 2028, when the House could be very close. So there's a lot of national ramifications and a lot of reasons why people should pay attention to a race in a way that they might not think about. They might think about, oh, this is just in Wisconsin, it's important for Wisconsin, but why does it matter to me? It matters because, I mean, this is an election, and there's some other state Supreme Court races as well that this relates to, but this is the kind of thing where what happens in Wisconsin could have a national impact on what's happening in other places, particularly the dynamics of the U.S. House.
For people who aren't elected, right, Wisconsinites, especially as the price of eggs are going up, people are losing their jobs. I think it's going to get worse before it gets better, if it gets better. For people listening, what can they do, you think? Because so many people feel powerless, and they're like, dude, I'm not a Democrat. I don't have the money. I don't have the machinery. But like you said, the reason why I'm so focused on this and why I think it's so important, and we have like 1,800 crises, Ari. So
Yeah.
your piece, which should be like alarm, 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 because I'm a nerd, a recovering attorney. I know they're focused on the courts. They've been after the courts for 40 years, right?
Yeah.
It's nerdy and wonky, and people are like, they go for the cultural issues, which is also important. But this is where they get power, and this is where they drastically take away our rights. What can people on the ground do?
So, and I should just preface it by saying, I'm not advocating to elect a certain candidate. So I'm not saying that people I'm not advocating that you should elect a progressive candidate. But I think if people want to get involved to support that
let me put it this way,
person.
to not get you in trouble. How do people ensure oligarchies and dark money doesn't come into their state and take away their rights?
Well, I mean, I think first off, if you donate to a state Supreme Court justice, that gives a lot more bang for your buck than a presidential race. So I think money matters in these kind of contests. Organizing matters in a lot of these contests. Making phone calls, knocking on doors. There's not the manpower that there is in a presidential race. So that kind of stuff matters. And groups like Swing Left, for example, are helping people get involved in Wisconsin. Letting people in Wisconsin know this is happening. I mean, you'd be surprised that I think there's a lot of people in Wisconsin that don't even know there's an election going forward, because it's April 2025. And I think a lot of people, it's a weird time to have an election. A lot of people are burnt out still from 2024. But the big picture of why I think this matters is that the states are where you can tangibly fight back against Trump right now. The states are where Democrats can actually resist, either by fighting Trump's policies or passing good policies that Trump-proof their states. So that is really important. But the states are also where you can have different outcomes that send a message about Trumpism 2.0. So like I said, I think it's really going to matter if the MAGA endorsed candidate who's backed by Elon Musk and eventually Donald Trump, if that person loses in Wisconsin months after Trump is inaugurated, that's going to send a message that Musk, Trumpism, this isn't working like it might have worked in November 2024. And people are having a reaction against it. And so I think not only will it tangibly matter in terms of protecting key rights and freedoms, but I think it will also matter in terms of the narrative. And in terms of the narrative that Trump is invincible, that Trump is king-like, that he and Musk have this oligarchy that can't be countered. And you'll start to see like this is how it's going to be countered. It's going to first have to happen at the state level, then they're going to have to build power at the state level that's going to affect what happens in Washington in 2026, 2028.
Ari, thanks so much as always for your reporting, for joining us. Please shamelessly promote yourself. How can people read you and support you?
People can find me on Blue Sky at Ari Berman and whatever the rest of the Blue Sky thing is. I still don't understand that. They can read my stuff at motherjones.com, and they can buy my books wherever books are sold.
Ari is the national voting rights correspondent at Mother Jones. The piece is Elon Musk is trying to buy the Wisconsin Supreme Court. I will link to it. Keep reading him as he keeps diving into this issue and trying, at the very least, to protect our democracy from the Broligarchy. As always, everyone, stay safe, stay informed, take care of yourselves, your family, your community, and please, oh please, don't be a fascist. Take care.